Thanks for watching. Enjoy the story. Hey, everyone. I, 27F, recently threw a retirement party for my parents, and things didn't exactly go as planned. Now I'm wondering if I went too far by asking them to help cover the cost. Here's what happened. My parents are both retiring this year, and I thought it would be nice to throw a big celebration to honor their decades of hard work. They've always been there for family events and have done so much for everyone else, so I wanted to give back with a memorable night just for them. I had this idea of organizing a surprise party with all of their friends, family, and coworkers, which sounded great in theory. As I started planning, I realized it would be more expensive than I'd anticipated. I'd originally imagined a simple gathering, but when I thought about renting a nice venue, getting catering, and setting up decorations, the budget quickly spiraled. I didn't want it to be some small thing. I wanted it to feel special, so I convinced myself to go through with it even though it stretched my finances thin. I thought, this is for my parents, and they deserve it. On the night of the party, I was so excited to finally reveal everything to them. They showed up, and I shouted surprise, expecting them to be thrilled. But their reactions were not what I'd hoped for. My mom seemed shocked, but not in a good way. She kept making comments about how they would have preferred a smaller gathering, and my dad even joked, kind of awkwardly, that I must have spent a fortune on this. They were polite to everyone and thanked me at the end, but I could tell it wasn't the night they would have chosen for themselves. Afterward, I was left feeling deflated and stressed about the amount I'd spent. Between the venue, catering, and decor, it ended up costing me close to $3,000, way more than I'd initially planned. So, after some hesitation, I asked my parents if they'd be able to chip in, or at least help cover part of the cost. I tried to explain that I'd wanted to do something meaningful for them, but their underwhelming reaction had left me feeling like I might have misunderstood what they'd actually want. They were not happy with my request. My dad said he never asked for a party and didn't see why he should pay for something he didn't want. My mom was more understanding, but still felt like it was inappropriate to ask for money after the fact. Now things feel tense between us, and I feel guilty but also frustrated. The morning after the party, I woke up feeling a mix of exhaustion and worry. Despite my best efforts to make the night memorable, the lackluster reaction from my parents was still fresh in my mind. I couldn't shake the nagging thought that maybe I'd gone overboard, or worse, that I'd completely missed what they would have wanted. Trying to clear my head, I sat down with a cup of coffee and scrolled through my phone, hoping that maybe the flood of family photos and messages from guests would make me feel better. Most of the texts were positive, with a lot of my parents' friends thanking me for the night and saying how nice it was to catch up with everyone. But then I saw a message from my mom. "Thank you for the party, sweetie, but next time, you really don't have to go to such lengths." It was a simple message, but it landed with a sting. I hadn't been looking for over-the-top praise, but I'd hoped for something a bit more enthusiastic. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that my mom was just private about big displays. Still, I couldn't ignore the growing pit in my stomach. As I sat there, I started doing the math in my head again, tallying up every expense. The catering alone had been over $1,500, and the venue, though simple, was another big chunk. Decorations, invitations, a few bottles of wine, it all added up so quickly, totaling close to $3,000. I'd put it all on my credit card, convincing myself it was worth the investment. But now, with my parents' lukewarm reaction, I wasn't sure I'd made the right call. A part of me kept thinking, maybe if they realized just how much this cost, they'd understand why I'm asking for help. I decided to call my mom, hoping a conversation might clear things up. She picked up after a few rings, and I tried to ease into the topic by asking if she and Dad had enjoyed the party. She said they appreciated the effort, but confessed that it had felt a little overwhelming. She went on to say that they would have been happier with a small family dinner. Feeling a bit defensive, I mentioned the cost and admitted that I was in a tighter spot than I'd anticipated. I asked if they'd be willing to pitch in, explaining that I'd wanted to do something special for them, but hadn't expected it to be so pricey. There was a long pause on the other end before she said, "Honey, we didn't ask for a party. If you couldn't afford it, you shouldn't have done it." That stung. I could feel a mix of embarrassment and resentment bubbling up, and I wasn't sure what to say next. Finally, I just muttered something about needing to think things over and hung up. Now, I was even more conflicted. Part of me felt foolish for assuming they'd want to contribute to something they hadn't asked for. But another part felt a little hurt and frustrated. Hadn't this been a gesture of love? Couldn't they at least acknowledge the effort I'd put in, even if it hadn't been exactly what they'd wanted? The financial stress was pressing on me, and I started questioning whether I should have just let it go and stuck to a more modest plan. I couldn't shake the feeling that, for all the thought and expense, I'd somehow missed the mark. A few days went by, and the awkwardness between my parents and me hadn't gotten any better. Every time we spoke, it felt tense and uncomfortable. I kept replaying that last conversation with my mom, her words echoing in my mind, "If you couldn't afford it, you shouldn't have done it." It felt so dismissive, almost like my gesture was being reduced to a reckless decision instead of the heartfelt celebration I'd intended. Feeling lost, I decided to reach out to my older sister, Rachel. Rachel is usually the voice of reason in the family, and I hoped she'd understand my side, or at least offer some insight into why our parents seemed so ungrateful. I called her and laid everything out, the idea behind the party, the budget spiraling out of control, my hope that the event would be a meaningful gesture, and the underwhelming response from our parents. I even confessed that I'd asked them to help with the costs and how that conversation had gone south. When I finished, Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed and said, "Honestly, I think your heart was in the right place, but I'm not sure Mom and Dad are the big party types. I think they would have been happier with something simple." "I get that," I replied, feeling a little defensive. "But they've always done so much for us. I wanted them to feel celebrated." I know, she said gently, but maybe they didn't see it that way. You know how they are. They're pretty private about things, and they're not great at showing excitement for big gestures. It's just not their thing. I felt a wave of frustration and disappointment. But I thought this was a way to honor them. Am I really the only one who thought it would mean something? Rachel hesitated, then added, Look, I think they probably do appreciate it. They're just uncomfortable with the idea of spending so much money on a party for themselves. You know how Mom is about finances. That was true. My mom had always been frugal. She was the type who'd insist on finding a deal or clipping coupons, even if it took twice as long. Maybe my asking for money had struck a nerve, especially considering she never would have spent that much on herself. But still, I couldn't shake the sense that they were overlooking the intention behind my effort. Maybe you should just let it go, Rachel suggested gently. I don't think you'll get them to pitch in, and pushing it might make things worse. Just chalk it up to a learning experience, you know? Her words left me feeling even more torn. I understood where she was coming from, but my financial stress was real, and it didn't feel fair to be carrying this alone. I'd been willing to put myself in a tight spot because I thought it was something meaningful for our parents. Wasn't it reasonable to hope for a little acknowledgement, or at least some support with the bill? Over the next few days, I thought about Rachel's advice, but the resentment kept simmering. I started questioning my decision to throw the party in the first place and wondering if I'd misjudged my own parents completely. I didn't know what to do next, whether to try talking to my parents one more time or just swallow the loss and move on. Either way, I was left with a lingering feeling that the gesture I'd made for love had somehow backfired. After my talk with Rachel, I decided to give things a bit of space. But my finances weren't going to wait for me to sort through my family dynamics. I could already feel the strain as I looked at the growing credit card balance, and every time I saw the statement, it stung. It felt like a reminder of the emotional fallout from what I'd hoped would be a joyous celebration. A few weeks later, my dad called to check in. We exchanged the usual small talk, but I could sense something lingering in his tone, like he had something else on his mind. Finally, he came out with it. Hey, I know you asked Mom about helping out with the party costs, he said, sounding a bit awkward. We've talked about it a bit. For a second, my heart lifted. Maybe they'd come around and realized I hadn't meant to burden them, but was just looking for a little help. But my dad's voice stayed measured. I understand why you might be stressed about the cost, he continued, but it was a surprise. We didn't ask for it. And honestly, we would have been happier with a quiet night in. You know, your mom and me, we're not really the type for big celebrations. I try to keep my tone even, but I felt that pang of disappointment all over again. I get that, Dad. I really do. I thought it was something that would mean a lot. I wanted you both to feel celebrated after all these years of hard work. It was never my intention to make anyone uncomfortable. He paused, and I could tell he was trying to find the right words. We know you put a lot of work into it, and we appreciate that. But you're young, and I don't want to see you in debt over this. Your mom feels that if you couldn't afford it, you should have reconsidered. It's not that we don't care, it's just that we wouldn't have chosen this for ourselves. I took a deep breath, fighting the frustration building up. I understand, Dad. But it's hard for me to be okay with that when I put myself in a rough spot trying to do something nice. I thought it was something special, you know? Sometimes, simple is better, he said softly. We would have appreciated just a nice dinner, maybe with family. But now, you've spent all this money, and I think that's what's troubling your mom the most. She doesn't want you to feel like you need to spend that much on us. We're your parents. We don't need anything fancy. I couldn't help but feel a bit exasperated. I get it, but this wasn't just about the money. It was a gesture. I thought it would make you both feel valued. And now I feel like it's just gone wrong. My dad sighed, and I could sense a bit of guilt in his voice. Listen, I'll talk to your mom about maybe helping with a small part of the cost. But I want you to know, we don't need grand gestures to know you care about us. Just remember that for next time. I wasn't sure how to feel as we hung up. There was a tiny bit of relief that he'd talked to my mom about chipping in, but the conversation left me feeling unsettled. I felt like, in trying to honor them, I'd crossed some unspoken boundary. It was like there was a disconnect between what I thought they'd appreciate and what they'd actually wanted, and that gap left me feeling more isolated than ever. Now, I was left to wait and see if they decide to help with the finances, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the emotional toll had already been taken. A few days after my talk with my dad, he called again to suggest we meet as a family to discuss everything in person. I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I agreed. Maybe an open conversation would help clear the air. We decided to meet at their house on a Sunday afternoon. Rachel was there, too, since she wanted to support both sides. I appreciated her presence, but felt a bit nervous, like I was walking into some kind of negotiation. When we sat down, my mom got straight to the point. We love you and appreciate everything you tried to do for us, she began. But we don't feel comfortable with the idea of covering a big expense we didn't ask for. Your dad and I have thought it over, and we really wish you hadn't felt pressured to throw such a large party. Her tone was calm, but I could feel the underlying disappointment. I glanced over at Rachel, hoping for some reassurance, but she just gave me a small, sympathetic smile. I took a breath and tried to explain my side. I understand that you didn't ask for it. I just thought that this was something you would enjoy, and I wanted to honor both of you. I thought it was the right thing to do. My dad nodded thoughtfully. We understand that you meant well, but your mom and I have never been big on grand celebrations. We're private people, and we don't need a big party to feel appreciated. There was an awkward pause, and I felt torn. Part of me wanted to defend my decision to throw the party, but another part of me was exhausted. I hear you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But I also feel like the intention behind it is being overlooked. I put myself in a tough spot financially, because I thought it was worth it for you both. I didn't mean for this to become a burden. My mom looked down, and for the first time, I saw a hint of remorse. Honey, we didn't want you to sacrifice so much. We never would have wanted you to spend that kind of money on us, especially if it was difficult for you. That's why this is hard for us. 2. Then my dad added, look, we can help with a little bit, maybe enough to ease things for you. But we don't feel it's fair to pay for something we never agreed to. I felt a wave of mixed emotions, relief that they were willing to help even a little, but frustration that they seemed so stuck on the fact that they hadn't asked for it. I could see their perspective, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing my point entirely. Rachel finally spoke up, offering a bit of perspective. Maybe both sides can try to see where the other is coming from. I know you, Mom and Dad. You've always been practical and you value simple things. And I know you, too, she said, looking at me. You wanted to do something big and meaningful, even if it wasn't something they'd specifically asked for. Her words helped ease the tension a bit. My mom softened, and my dad even managed a small smile. We know you love us and we love you, too, my dad said. And we'll help with what we can. But please, in the future, don't feel like you need to go to such lengths. I nodded, though part of me still felt unsatisfied. This whole situation had left me feeling misunderstood, like my efforts were being weighed purely in financial terms, rather than what they meant. But at least I knew my parents didn't hold anything against me. As we wrapped up, I left their house feeling a little lighter, but still reflecting on the conversation. I realized that my gesture, however well-intentioned, had been rooted in my own idea of what honoring my parents should look like. In my attempt to show my love through a grand event, I had overlooked the simple ways they'd always preferred to show theirs. In the days following our family meeting, I kept replaying the conversation in my head. The feeling of relief that my parents had agreed to help a bit financially was tempered by a lingering frustration. I had poured so much time, energy, and money into this party, yet they'd made it clear they would have preferred something simpler, something quieter. Trying to find a way to make peace with it, I decided to dive into the photos and videos from the night. As I looked through the images, I noticed the expressions on my parents' faces, smiles that seemed a bit forced, moments where they looked more overwhelmed than happy. It was then that I began to understand. I'd thrown this party based on my own definition of celebration, not theirs. I realized that, in a way, the whole party had been more about me wanting to do something grand, to prove my appreciation in a big way. But for them, the big didn't translate to meaningful. I'd taken what they'd taught me, humility, frugality, simplicity, and done the exact opposite, assuming it would be a great gift. The more I thought about it, the more I understood my parents' reaction. They had lived a life where big gestures weren't necessary, where a small family dinner would have said just as much. For them, love wasn't in flashy parties or big spending. It was in the quiet, everyday moments. They showed it through quiet support, patience, and stability, and perhaps they'd hoped I would see that in simpler terms, too. That realization was humbling. I still felt a pang of disappointment over how it had all turned out, but I also felt a strange sense of gratitude. Maybe, in a way, this experience was its own kind of lesson one my parents had unintentionally given me. They'd shown me, through their reaction, that sometimes love is best expressed in understated ways, and that value doesn't always come from how big something is. As a form of closure, I decided to write them a letter. I thanked them for the help they'd agreed to give, even though the party hadn't been something they would have chosen. I apologized for not seeing things from their perspective sooner, and acknowledged that I'd been trying to celebrate them in a way that felt right to me, rather than what might have felt right to them. In closing, I wrote, I know that a big party wasn't what you needed, but I hope you can see that it was my way of saying I love you and admire everything you've done for me. And I understand now that sometimes love is quieter than we realize. I wasn't sure how they would respond, but sending the letter felt like the right way to move forward. I was letting go of my need for them to fully understand my gesture, and instead, I wanted them to simply know that I respected their preferences. A few days later, my mom texted me, "Thank you for your letter, honey. We're proud of you, and we love you. We know you wanted to show that, and that means a lot to us." It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it didn't need to be. In the end, I think we all came to a better understanding of each other, even if it took a few bumps along the way. And as for future celebrations, I made a quiet promise to myself that the next time I wanted to honor my parents, I'd think about what they valued most: quiet moments, thoughtful gestures, and simplicity, and let that guide me. Months passed, and the memory of the retirement party softened. I'd paid off most of the party expenses, and the tension with my parents had eased. The letter had seemed to bring a sense of peace to all of us, and in a quiet way, we'd moved forward. One afternoon, my parents invited me and Rachel over for small dinner. My mom had cooked one of our favorite family meals, and the atmosphere was warm, comfortable, and familiar. As we sat around the table sharing stories, laughing, and simply enjoying each other's company, I was struck by how effortless it all felt. This was the kind of celebration they'd wanted all along. Toward the end of the night, my dad raised his glass and said, "Here's to family." To the big moments, the small moments, and everything in between, it was such a simple toast, yet it felt like a perfect acknowledgement of everything we'd been through. Looking around the table, I realized that the love and appreciation I'd tried to express with the party were already present in moments like these, quiet, genuine, and full of meaning. It wasn't about big gestures or expensive venues. For my parents, it was about sharing life together, knowing we were all there for each other. As I left that night, I felt a deep sense of contentment. I didn't need to prove my love with grand parties or elaborate events. I could honor my parents by appreciating the values they'd passed down, the simplicity that had always been at the heart of our family. I left with a promise to myself. From now on, I would celebrate in a way that truly reflected who we were as a family. And in that simple, quiet resolve, I knew I'd found the perfect way to honor my parents, not just in a single night, but in all the days to come.